run through a number of checks. They'll talk about it tomorrow, exactly what they'll do. And there's also the offer of a few hours of free consultancy if the health checks show up anything that could be improved. So somebody, I can't remember who, will be talking a bit about that tomorrow. And there's a bit more about the consultancy service, which is the paid for service above and beyond the free checks that we're offering. Anyway, today, so introducing ourselves. I've already done that, that's good. So we're going to be talking a little bit about what Baseline actually is and why we're doing it. We're going to be talking about how that interacts with work that's going on internationally. And we're talking about some stuff going on in the UK Fed. As we've said in the slides here, give us, please, this is not meant to be a session of me and Alex just talking at you. Because of the nature of Zoom, I'm not expecting it to be maybe as interactive as it would be if we were all in person, but hopefully we can get somewhere near that. So please use the chat window, and when we're done, we'll hopefully have get a bit of a discussion going on. So we want your views and opinions on pretty much everything about UK Fed and what we should and shouldn't be doing, and particularly because of today's topic around the baseline work that we're thinking of doing. So first of all, what do we actually mean by baseline? This is something missing from the slides. So in a sense, the UK Federation already has a baseline, which is we have a set of rules of membership that every member has signed up to when they joined the UK Federation, and we have things like technical specifications to the Federation, and we have technical recommendations to participants, which are, some of these documents are getting a little old now. We're just going through the process of updating them. So there will be some new versions of these coming out at some point. And they, in a sense, represent a baseline. What we mean by a baseline here is a common minimum standard that everyone should adopt. The current baseline to the UK Federation is pretty simple because we're, when it was built, it was designed to allow for maximum compatibility nationally, so that we're not too prescriptive about too many things to make it too hard for people to join and manage. But we do need a certain level of shared understanding of how to do things. And this is kind of partly in a behavioral sense. So things like, the rules of membership, everyone signs up to them, say things like you will run your systems properly and keep them secure. Some stuff around identity management and reusability of persistent identifiers, things like that. And then there's also some technical requirements about what your system should be capable of and how they should interoperate, and how we manage the metadata that enables all of this, stuff like that. So what we mean by baseline here comes from InCommon, the US Federation, started a process which they called the InCommon baseline, where they raised the bar of what they expected everyone in their federation to do. They made it a absolute requirement to be a part of their federation, and they gave their members, I can't remember, I found a year or two to get up to standard, and people would be removed if they didn't get up to standard. What we're probably, this is all still in flux as we decide what to do. What we're probably going to be doing in the UK Federation is a bit lighter touch than that, because we have a lot broader community in the UK Federation. Is not that if you don't meet this new baseline, you will be kicked off the Federation, but rather the baseline that we're dealing with is designed to assist with international interoperability. So at the very least, those who don't meet this new baseline will not be included in the feed that we export into Edugain, which is the way we interfederate with 60-something, maybe 70-something now, countries worldwide. So, for example, if you're a small college and you don't do much internationally, and the things we're asking you to do to meet this new baseline are too hard for you, doesn't mean you wouldn't be kicked off the UK Federation. You'll still be on the UK Federation, able to do all the things you need to do to get to, say, the eBooks for FE service and stuff like that. But for those who do care about the bigger picture of international interoperability, so, you know, research universities with students coming from all around the world who may want to access services from around the world, then you would be required to meet this slightly higher bar. And the reason being that baseline is designed, our baseline will be designed to help the international interoperability, that's really hard to say, problems that we, well, you and we experience day to day when trying to do this kind of thing. So InCommon rolled out their version of this, and now everyone in InCommon, so InCommon is the biggest federation in the world. UK Federation used to be the biggest RNE, Research and Education Federation in the world. The UK Federation used to have that crown, but InCommon overtook us a little while ago. We are now second biggest, and between us and America, we are by far the biggest two in the world. When they rolled this out, it took them, they estimate, 2 to 3 person years of effort to implement, in terms of them interacting with all their membership and helping them get up to speed and whatnot. So this is not a fast process. This is not a simple process. We're not going to be making any massively complicated requirements, and we'll go through what they are likely to be later, but they do require a little bit of work and a lot of communication with the members and whatnot, which is where it all all the work goes. In the US, they have a thing called the Federation Manager, which is a self-service web interface to manage Federation metadata. On the UK Fed, we'll be doing this at the moment. We still have the email as our primary interface for people to make changes. We are still, after quite a long time, building and piloting our own self-service web interface, but that'll be coming some way down the line. But that's kind of orthogonal to the actual issue, I guess. To give you an idea of why international interoperability is important, if we have a quick look at some charts. So the UK Federation has, there aren't any absolute numbers there, but if I look at Slack, at my last automated message, the UK Federation currently has 2,398 entities in it. If you look at the UK Federation plus Edugain, so all the services that are exposed to all UK Federation members from Edugain, if I can remember which one that goes into. No, not that one, not that one. Oh, sorry, directly underneath. I was being completely blind. So we've got 2,000, basically 2,400 entities in the UK Federation. If you include all the ones that get pulled into the UK Fed from the international world, we've got 7,200 entities. So there's a lot of stuff internationally. So looking at us within Edugain, which is this way of interfederating I was talking about, we represent 27% of Edugain. InCommon are the green blob, and they represent a roughly similar amount. And then everyone else are much smaller pieces of the pie. The other big piece of the pie, the red one on that slide, is other. So that's from the other 50 or 60 other countries not listed there. And within our federation, as I said, our own metadata is about 33%. And so 67% of the entities in our federation actually come from abroad. So there's a big interfederated world out there. Part of the problem with interfederation is I'll get to the slide in a second. Other federations do things slightly differently. Every federation has decided to go its own way in various behavioral or technical requirements. So what Baseline is attempting to do is to kind of make how everyone runs things a little more cohesive and try to raise the bar at the same time. So today, if there's a student in a UK institution trying to access a resource in America and it's come in through Edugain and something goes wrong, for a start, it would be nice if things went wrong a little bit less because of some of these international interoperability issues. And secondly, it would be nice if there was a better way of dealing with it when things went wrong, which is the other aspect of baseline. So baseline is partly about making things a bit more technically interoperable, and partly about defining how interactions happen to figure out how what actually went wrong. So that can be interactions between members and their federations, and between federations and other federations. We are not an island. Obviously we are, but we're not. So there is a group called REFEDS, which is Research and Education Federations. God, I can't remember what it stands for. Maybe Alex can tell us in a minute if he remembers. Research and Education Federation. Oh, that's it, I guess. Research and Education Federations, which is the group that we're a part of, that all of the research federations, research and education federations worldwide generally are a part of, and it's the way we coordinate activity between ourselves. So InCommon did this baseline thing first. We thought that's a good idea, we should do something similar. Lots of other people have thought that as well. So we collectively thought, well, what we should actually do then is make sure that the baselines everyone applies are roughly similar. So there is a working group which is looking at coordinating the baseline expectations across federations to make this much more useful. It did start drafting. We are partway through this process. It did start drafting a properly technical profile, but that became problematic for various reasons. So the technical aspects are being punted to Edugain, the interfederation service, and it's actually going to be defining a more behavioral set of things, and is split into what we expect SP operators to do, what we expect IDP operators to do, what we expect federation operators to do, and what we expect interfederation operators to do. So I will hand over to Alex at this point, who will talk a bit about each of these things. That's okay, Alex?
Yeah, that's fine.
Do you want me, I'll stop sharing and start sharing with you.
I cannot apparently share my screen. Maybe I'm not actually yeah, I'm not co-host.
One sec, I'll make you a host.
Yeah.
Alex Stewart. Oh, I'm not a host, so I can't make you a host. Mark, can you make Alex a host, please?
Yep, just doing it.
No luck, Mark? So, while we figure this out, I'll just share my slides, Alex.
Oh, yeah, okay.
If I can find them again.
Good.
Possibly we're co-hosts, and as a co-host, I can't nominate another host. So somebody who's a host needs to make me or Alex. There we go. Well, there's some slides anyway.
Okay, grand. Yeah, thanks very much. So yes, just kind of following on from the last slide. That so it seems that the baseline expectations are splitting into the higher level descriptive statements, which are deliberately designed to provoke discussion. And then the technical baselines, which have proved really difficult to agree on internationally. Well, some of them are almost trivial to do. So, for example, there's some parts of like the Edugain profile which are very simple to increase the the baseline of. So to move from a kind of should to a must in that kind of normative language. And there are some that people were just not being, we couldn't agree in a reasonable amount of time. So this is why the kind of split into two parts. The RefEds part, which is the high level, which is what a federation should do or an interfederation should do, and then moving the technical work specifically to Edugain, who run the Edugain service, the metadata aggregation and so on. So we've got the next few slides, which are the draft expectations that are going through at the moment. I'm not sure of the exact timescales, but this is a relatively late draft. People are working through the sections week by week. So my expectation is that these will be put out to consultation relatively soon. I'm not sure whether I won't read through all of them to start off with. But from the IDP point of view, I've just listed those there. The operated with organizational level authority is really to stop there being an IDP sitting on a kind of development box on someone's desk. It's trusted within the organization. There's kind of generally accepted security practices, and then IDP04, which is the registered metadata is complete, accurate, and up to date. That will be a bit of a theme through the rest of the presentation. But it is saying that we do need to have the metadata registered. So as Reece said earlier, we have an email-based help desk, an email-based process for updating your entity's registration at the moment. And then IDP05 is the last one, which is, I think this is one where I don't know whether this seems reasonable to IDP operators who are on the call, and I'm kind of inviting feedback at this point. The reason it's written as it says, that IDP shall support applicable and necessary automated release mechanisms of user information, is a kind of technology neutral way of saying support entity categories, or entity attributes rather, because these are specific SAML, they may or may not be specific SAML things. We certainly use them in a SAML specific way. And so this IDP05 as it is trying to describe that in a technology neutral way. And I don't know whether that is clear to IDP operators. If, for example, they saw something like that, they would know whether they reached that or not. But that's certainly one thing we'd like to hear feedback on. If there's no one who wants to chime in on that at the moment, I can move on to the next slide. Although when I say I can move on to the next slide, I think it'll be Reece who moves on to the next slide. Although I should be able to share my screen. Reece, would you be able to turn off your screen sharing?
Alex,
Yeah.
I can boot Reece out and you should be able to share because I've got you down as co-host with shareability and everything, but it's possible that if I boot him out, we might lose the slides. So
yeah, it says your screen sharing is paused. So I've tried to share my screen, but cannot do that at the moment. Oh, thanks, Gary.
There seems to be a drop down to choose different screen shares, so I can see Alex's and Reese's. I don't know how that works.
It's open source. We forked the presentation.
Yeah, other people can see. They've switched to Alex's screen.
Right. Okay. Right. I'll just kind of rattle on then. The SP operators, I'm not sure. I think most people were IDP operators who are on the call. So I'm not proposing to go through these in any detail. But it's the kind of usual things that the SP is operated well. It takes care with user data. It doesn't share them, and these to an extent come out from because this came from In Common, which didn't have a tradition of GDPR and so on. So I think the wording of these kind of reflects trying to get kind of good practice in that kind of GDPR sense into the baseline expectations. And the fourth one on that is, once again, it's the metadata registered in the Federation, complete, accurate and up to date. That's the theme going through. Draft expectations for us as Federation operators. That first one, I think, is the critical one, that we're should be trustworthy. It's our primary objective, and we should be transparent about the efforts. I'm not sure. I mean, we are transparent in many aspects. One of them is the metadata tooling that we have, and this is the open source part of it. It's Apache license. It's put up on GitHub. There's the metadata aggregation framework based on Shibboleth technology, and with UK Federation additions to that. So in that sense, there's a transparency associated with the machinery, with some of the machinery involved. It's another thing we'd like to get feedback on. If there are things, if there are mechanisms by which we can be transparent, please feed those back to us, and we will try and be transparent. I think part of that as well is these kind of town halls. Well, hopefully ones in person rather than across Zoom. We had arranged to have this as part of a number of face-to-face meetings. That's obviously not happening at the moment. So we do need some way to have information fed back to us. Through the help desk is important. We have a JISC Shibboleth mailing list as well, and hopefully there will be the face-to-face meetings later. Other things in this, I guess FO4 is the entity categories part of this that I kind of talked about a little bit earlier. So in fact, it seems that we've not taken entity categories out of the, we're not completely technology neutral. It still has a, sorry, I'm kind of doing proofreading on the hoof. But this is where the UK Federation will look to follow international best practice. And we've got an entity categories town hall meeting on Wednesday. It's the first part of Wednesday. So we'll go into those in a bit more detail at that point. But these involve code of conduct for service providers, how they deal with or how they handle attributes about the subjects, and Certify, which is an incident response framework for federated security incidents. And that's pretty much that one as a slide. As we said before, there's a lot of things that the UK Federation has already done by being one of the pioneers in this field, and having some excellent people involved at the start. A lot of things are already there. There's rules of membership, there's Federation technical specifications, there's technical recommendations for participants, we've got a website, we've got eligibility criterion. One of the things that we do have that is shared internationally is our metadata checking framework. And this is a de facto set of rules for the for EDUGAIN, and part of the EDUGAIN support team review the warnings and errors that are flagged by the UK federations, well, both the UK Federation and the InCommon Federation's metadata import rules. So some of the effort is now building up more of those metadata checks. They're possibly easier to do because it's a technical check that happens in one place. The behavioural thing, the behavioural expectations are much harder to understand. You know, Rhys was saying beforehand, it's that kind of communication that takes time, takes years in some cases to build up that communication. So we're about halfway through this this talk, or this presentation rather. So just to, I mean, maybe invite any. I don't think there's any kind of questions on the group chat about the content so far. I don't know if anyone wants is looking to give any feedback at this point. In which case, I'll just, the next few slides, we'll talk a little bit about the UK Federation itself. You know, one of the threads beforehand, keep your registrations up to date, and it's the question is how are we up to date? How can we measure it? What is up to date? So we look at software versions, configuration of those, and interactions with the UK Federation service interface, contacts, and XML encryption. So we've got a bit more kind of graphic at the moment. And this is a graph of the data we can glean from the UK Federation's metadata servers. As I expect you know that the entities make periodic requests to the UK Federation metadata servers to get metadata about entities that they're going to interoperate with. The Shibboleth IDP, or the Shibboleth software by default, sends a user agent string with that identifies its version there. So we are able to look in our metadata servers and view the proportions, the numbers of, sorry, I say the versions of the IDPs. It's unique IP addresses, so it's not quite as direct a number as this is versions of the IDP. This is unique IP addresses, and we can see that the each of those color bars represents a particular version of the Shibboleth IDP, and this is IDP3 and IDP4. The top line is the envelope is about 450, so we have data on about 450 IP addresses or Shibboleth IDPs that are downloading metadata from the UK Federation. The Shibboleth project defines supported versions of their IDP. Currently, it defines that as the latest version, 4.0.1, and the latest and the previous stable version is 3.4.6. I mean, 3.4.6 is the big blue big blue band across towards the top of the data. There's a small amount of IDPv4 that's in the UK Federation. And in fact, IDPv4 was released in March this year, which is actually where the kind of discontinuity arrives about halfway across that graph. So I apologise that is probably a little bit small to see, but that's the week starting it's the kind of the middle week of March. So the 11th of March, the Shibboleth project released IDPv4 to general availability, and the week later, a lot of IP addresses, a lot of IDPs in the UK Federation then moved to the latest version of version 3. And I presume that is in preparation for moving to v4 when it settles down somewhat. There's a one bug fix release so far. I'm not sure whether there will be there. I don't know, actually. I mean, I haven't, this is a question from Robert in Oxford. Do we know why the use of IDP 346 grew so much in March after the release of 4.0? And I suspect that is people who are managing IDPs saw that IDPv4 was out and wanted to be ready for that. I've not gone back into the data to see whether these IP addresses belong to, there may be an IDP that is overrepresented in the IP address space because they've got some kind of dynamic IDP there. But there's certainly a couple of, you can see in the details in the data, it's not just a single deployment that has 20 different IP addresses moved to 346. There's definitely different versions that move in there. And the stuff in the chat is absolutely right. And the 11th of, yeah, so I think this is the IDP operators being on the ball, I think is a kind of summary of that. And I've not looked at this until preparing these slides. Sorry, I've not looked at the data since kind of COVID lockdown, since preparing the slides. So that's quite, that was quite an interesting piece of data. So, so yeah, the SPs, the Shibboleth SP also has a similar thing, but I've not looked at the data of whether those are up to date. And non-Shibboleth SPs or IDPs that aren't the Shibboleth, we could potentially do similar kind of analyses, but I'm not, that's great use, but I mean, it's relatively time consuming and you have to look at what the benefits are for that. In a couple of slides time, I might be able to show one of the things there. And this is moving on to metadata query, which is a new bit of service interface. Sorry, when I say new, it's a few years old. I think 2014 it was made. That was made live. And metadata query is, or the difference between metadata aggregates, those of you who don't know, the analog is when it went from the etc hosts files to a kind of DNS, resolution of domain names. You had an aggregate of all the data you knew that had to be shared to something that was just in time, and one would access the data as and when you needed it. And the graph on the left there shows the metadata aggregate size that the UK Federation publishes. And in 2014, there's a second line that just keeps increasing faster. Oh, sorry, it increases faster. It's kind of linear. It increases faster. That is the metadata that we ingest from Edugain. And right at the beginning, you saw that there was like a third of the UK Federation metadata aggregate is from entities we register, and 2/3 is imported. When we, I mean, the metadata query servers have been operating without any downtime for years now. We haven't formally moved this out of pilot, but that will come in the next version of the Federation technical specifications. But at the moment, IDPs can just use the metadata query server. They will query our MDQ service as and when they get authentication requests from SPs. And there's a certain amount of caching within the Shibboleth IDP as well. SPs, on the other hand, can't immediately move to MDQ because for discovery they need to know all the metadata about all the IDPs they interoperate with to build that discovery interface. So this is why I've said that SPs that offload discovery can just use MDQ. However, having a local discovery service is better for the SP in general. The SP knows their own customers or their own users, and offloading discovery is one way to get to an operational service quicker, but it's perhaps not the best way in the long term. So SPs that do their own discovery have to consume the whole metadata aggregate, build a discovery interface from that. And what Ian has been building is a new set of metadata, or is this a JSON representation of the discovery elements of UK Federation metadata. This looks identical to that comes from the Shibboleth EDS feed. If you're an SP operator and or a Shibboleth SP operator, you'll know about that. And this is something that very soon, I think within an order of weeks maximum, we'd hope to have that available for SP operators to have a look at and see. The questions about the kind of trust model, the format to an extent, the size of it. There's questions about that. So once again, when we move to making that live, we will we'll publicize that. I think the back to graphs. This is probably illegible, and I apologise for that. Two separate graphs. They're both from Shibboleth IDPs. They're both looking at Shibboleth IDPs that are downloading UK Federation metadata. The graph on the left is the ones that use the old school metadata aggregate. The graph on the right is the ones that use the metadata query service. So we can see on the right that metadata query using IDPs are using much more up-to-date software. And the metadata aggregate, there's a lot of older versions of V3 within that. So going forward, trying to keep things up to date, I think we have to combine the two things. It's not just keep your software up to date, but it's keep your software up to date. Don't just update to the latest version of the IDP. One has to then look at the interface to the how one is using the UK Federation as well. That's yeah, and as the Shibboleth IDP V3 will go end of life, I think the current date is at the end of this year. That kind of communication will come out from the UK Federation, how we can support you. That will come out over the summer and later. More about up to date. Well, I can see we're into the last 15 minutes, so let me rattle through a bit. Up to date contacts. They provide the health of the it's a measure of the health of the system because it allows people to, or IDP and SPs to interoperate. So on. There's also a security contact defined under Certify. I see there was something on Certify going on in the chat. So for people who are not familiar with the Certify Certify entity categories, This is there's a framework in which you can signal that your entity, whether it's an SP or an IDP, will respond to federated security incidents. This has a number of requirements that are grouped into incident response and operational security, traceability, and they also have it also has a requirement of having a security contact within metadata. Although that security contact, to an extent, can operate independently of the full Certify framework. And so the last line is that we'll be developing workflows to do to keep these contacts up to date. And this is going to be, we're hoping that this is the first introduction of some kind of user interface to allow metadata management. I mean, it may be internal only, or we may be able to release that to a wider audience. But we are trying to develop tools that make keeping, you know, the workflow of keeping entity registrations up to date, trying to get that more automated. But I certainly don't want to publish how many email bounces we get when we send things out. Which I guess is one bit of feedback I would also like, which is how should the UK Federation communicate with its with the member organisations? Currently, we have just Shibboleth as a mailing list. We have a mail shot of contacts. There's kind of personal contacts. There's the help desk. So if there are other ways that we could get have these. Communicate with you and have you feedback your issues. We would be pleased to hear about those. Sorry, the wall. Yeah, so this is the last one about keeping up to date, and this is I'm still I haven't. I think this is kind of difficult to get. Yeah, thanks for Mark saying, if you don't want to feedback right now, feel free to email Mark himself. I think this XML encryption, this is something that I don't think I can do justice trying to speak about it. The summary is that the Shibboleth, a new install of the Shibboleth IDP v4 uses a version of XML encryption that is not formally broken. And so moving to that is a way of increasing the security posture of the Federation as a whole, or federated transactions. This may be a problem for SPs that can't signal what encryptions they can use. But it goes back, I think, all the way to the start of this, this session, where one of the things that the In Common baseline did was developed a process for an intent to alter metadata. So if we as Federation operators said, we need to make this change, otherwise we think the interoperability, you know, it'll break, it'll stop working. We need to define a process for that. And I think this this wee table really says that there's maybe 400 SPs in the UK Federation that there may be problems with for new installs of IDP v4. So this isn't an upgrade. I will work to get something better together for this, because I really haven't given this topic, haven't given it justice, because it's a complex one, and we haven't got, the UK Federation hasn't got a policy in place on how to deal with it. We just know that we want to enable that better security posture. Which leads me to the last slide, which is a summary of the whole thing. And I guess it's, you know, security is a process rather than a product. Keep your software up to date, keep your entity registrations up to date. Well, thank you for listening. got a couple
And
of
if it-
questions
So,
there.
and if anyone has any specific questions or any general questions about the UK Fed and where we're going and whatnot, then now's the time.
Yeah, if anybody's got anything they want us to talk about in the rest of the week, I'm sure we can probably find a little bit of space in other sessions.
And if anyone does have questions, feel free to either put them in the chat window or unmute yourself and ask one here. Or ask to unmute, I guess.
When will be their documentation about upgrade from V3 4.6 to V4? There's a question in chat from Matthew.
Yeah, I think that's something that I can't answer that. I mean, we want to do that as fast as we can, I think. So I guess one question would be, what kind of documentation would you need? I mean, currently we have web pages that say that, and I mean, we did from you know, the V2 to V3 transition. So if there's anything specific that you want in there, we can incorporate that in the documentation.
Yep. The upgrade from 3.4.6 to V4 is mostly the same as any other upgrade with SHIB. Review all the deprecation warnings that you may have in your logs and see if anything needs fixing. If it does, fix it until they go away. And at that point, you should be able to upgrade pretty seamlessly. But you know, the UK Fed help desk is always there if you have any issues anyway. More questions? Robert, what automated attribute release methods will be required by baseline? Well, we haven't quite decided yet, but there's only one real game in town there at the moment, which is RNS, so Research and Scholarship, which is releasing. If you support RNS, then you're going to release first name, last name, and email address, basically. There's a bit more complexity, but it's roughly that, to services which are tagged as research and scholarship. So those are vetted by Federation operators. It's not something anyone can have, and they are specifically services which are deemed lower risk, higher value, usually community operated kind of things. So RNS may be in there, still to be decided.
Yeah, and RNS is going through a review at the moment as well, because as well as those attributes you're saying, Reese, there's also the new identifiers, new SAML subject identifiers, which I think is getting is being reviewed at the moment. So, yeah, there's lots of things moving, and I'm not quite sure which is going to land first.
Yep, I can hear you breathing, John. So I'm going to mute you unless you've got something to say.
A couple more questions just come up in the chat.
Mark said EOL date for V3 was announced pre-COVID. Has there been any discussion about revising that? There has been discussion, but it can't happen because the EOL for V3 is based off of the fact that the underlying Spring framework on which it's built, the version of Spring on which it's built, is EOL at the end of December. So unless Spring decided to change their mind, the SHIB consortium have to EOL V3 at the same time. And from what we know, that is not happening. So V3 is going to have to be EOL'd as planned. I appreciate the question, and we've had the same thoughts ourselves, but it's yeah, as it based on underlying, not even minor dependencies, but you know, the framework and from which the thing is built. So it's pretty baked in. There's a question about V3 to V4 upgrade. Is it an in-place upgrade? It can be an in-place upgrade, yes. Is it recommended to upgrade in? Oh, John.
I was just going to say, the IDP itself is an in-place upgrade.
Ah, good point. Yeah.
The stuff around it might not be. It really depends how you're upgrading it and what you got in place already. So if you've got, you might have things that are built around the OS around the OS install, and that might trigger you to go, well, actually, I need to rebuild the OS. But you might have to take the IDP with it and upgrade it in place, not build from scratch in that new place.
Yeah. So in fact, it's actually it's the same answer we always give when I guess this question is asked, which is Shiv itself can be an in-place upgrade from V3 to V4, but there's as with any upgrade, you can use it as an opportunity to make sure all the other components in the stack are up to date. So if you're using Tomcat or Jetty, making sure they are up to date, the OS is up to date. Maybe now is the time to say switch from CentOS 7 to 8 or something. You may need to upgrade. Oh, I was just about to say that. Mark beat me to it. You may need to upgrade the version of Java you're running on, depending on how old your version of the IDP is. Because newer versions of Shiv IDP have different requirements around Java, the Java version you're running on. So there's, so the simple answer, yeah, in-place upgrade, but there's a much more complicated answer based on what you're running at the time. And also depending on how you've installed all of this and how it's packaged, if you're running all this on Windows, for example, and you're using the Shib installer to do it, that comes with Jetty pre-installed. And so if you upgrade from there, it will upgrade Jetty in place and whatnot for you. If you're running things more manually installed on Linux, your mileage may vary. Oh, and Ian's comment from the Shib project, and I assume this is from Ian's Shibboleth Consortium hat on. Strongly recommend the IDP should always be in place upgraded to ensure you preserve the behavior of your system. Yeah. Any other questions? We have a couple more minutes. Or comments, or things to throw at us.
Okay, I think we say see you all, hopefully many of you tomorrow.
As Mark said, any questions about any of this, feel free to email Mark. If you've got any questions about upgrades and whatnot, the help desk is always available, service@ukfederation.org.uk. Just ping us a line, really. Otherwise,
okay.
Yep.
And a recording of
more
this
stuff
session,
tomorrow.
Recording of this session will be up on the Federation news item with a link to it eventually once I've edited it slightly.
Yep, and if you do have any specific questions that occur to you after this and you would like them addressed tomorrow, Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday, drop us a line and we can ensure that we discuss those kind of things. Right. Thank you very much, everyone.